What are we discussing on today's Locked on Diamondbacks podcast? With pitchers like Max Fried getting over $200 million, does this price out the Dbacks from re signing Zac Gallen next summer?
You are Locked on Diamondbacks, your daily Arizona Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. You're listening to who? The always charismatic host of this podcast, Millard Thomas. I'm a multimedia journalist and I'm a graphic designer, so please go check out my website, millardthomas24.myportfolio.com. I'm there to see my latest work, from my packages to my articles to my photos and my graphic design. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. On today's Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, the hot stove has been heating up. We're discussing all the latest free agent signings, how the Max Fried signing affects the Zac Gallen market, and of course, discussing rumors from day two as well. Thank you for making Locked on Diamondbacks your first listen every day. I would not be able to do this podcast without you, my loyal listeners, sharing, subscribing, reviewing, doing all that so I could do this podcast for you. Thank you. It's free. It's available on all platforms. So please continue to tell your friends. One of those platforms is YouTube. Please subscribe to Locked on Diamondbacks on YouTube. All right, let's get into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast. And let's start with the big news of the day from winter meetings. Max Fried to the New York Yankees, another major bombshell. It sounded like there were a few teams in on the on the Max Frieds, like the Boston Red Sox and probably a couple other teams that really wanted the services of a pretty elite starting pitcher. I mean, you look at Max Fried's numbers since like 2020, he is like one of like the 5 ERA leaders, and it makes sense. His number in 2020, the COVID shortened season, 2.25 ERA, 3.04 ERA, 2.48, 2.55, and then this past season, 3.25. So this guy is a stud, a career 3.07 ERA, definitely an elite pitcher. But there are definitely some flaws in Max Fried's game, and the fact that the Yankees decided to give him an 8-year, $218 million deal, the most expensive for a left-handed pitcher in free agent history. There are some concerns of Max Fried when giving him that kind of money if you're the New York Yankees. After losing out on Juan Soto to the Mets, the Yankees said, we got to spend this money somehow. And right now, it looks like the Yankees are going to double down on their rotation and build a team through their pitching, because a couple off seasons ago, they gave Carlos Rodon a massive deal where he's getting paid like around $30 million annually. He was pretty terrible in the postseason this past year. And so what did the Yankees do? They said, let's double down. Let's get another bad postseason pitcher and pay him a ton of money. Because when talking about the risks and concerns of a Max Fried, you have to start by calling him kind of like the modern age Clayton Kershaw, because Fried puts up fantastic numbers in the regular season. But then you look at the postseason numbers for Fried, and it tells a different story. 12 career starts, 67 innings pitched, 38 earned runs, a 1.493 whip. That's good enough for a 5.1 ERA. He has not been a good playoff pitcher, and considering the Yankees are paying Rodon a ton of money the last couple of years to be a bad postseason pitcher as well, a little surprised to see the Yankees double down on another Rodon type, especially a guy who doesn't strike out batters at the same rate that Rodon does, less than 9 strikeouts per 9 innings this past year. I like Fried a lot. I think he's a stud pitcher. I do think he's an ace, but do I want to pay a guy who is going to be 31 years of age at the start of next season an 8-year contract around $27 million? The Yankees were willing to go to 8 years, more willing to go to 8 years than 7 years because of lowering the average annual value and the luxury tax and everything. But am I crazy to think it would be better if you decided to pay Max Fried 5 years, 35 annually instead of 8 years, 27, because I feel like those last 3 years are just going to be so bad when he's 35, 36, 37, 38 years of age. Like, is he going to be that effective? I'd rather just pay him for the first 5 when he's going to be at his best than continue to pay him after that. I don't understand why these teams are like, yeah, we'll take more years because it's a lower annual value. You're still paying a guy who might not be good an exorbitant amount of money. I'd rather just pay a little bit more of a premium to just get the best years out of a player instead of him, instead of me still paying a guy a lot of money for his so-so years. So kind of confused why the Yankees did that. Don't really love the Yankees offseason so far. Yes, Fried is a stud, but also a guy that's 31 years of age with the history of not striking out guys, with a history of struggling in the postseason. I don't know if he's the kind of guy I would do 8 years in the largest contract to a left-handed pitcher in Major League history. Also got the Blue Jays cooking up some deals. We discussed the Blue Jays as maybe a trade partner because I thought it was a team that was going to retool. They've been a team that's been rumored to be sniffing around the Vlad Guerrero Jr. market, right? Seeing what they could fetch for him. But instead, they just went the other way and acquired Andres Jimenez from the Cleveland Guardians, which is a nice pickup, mid-20s. I do think he's a little bit overrated when you talk about his offense profile. Yes, he puts up good wars because of his defense, but he's mostly just a defense speedster guy. 638 OPS this past year in 152 games, 712 OPS the year before. Like, his offense has just gone down every year since that 2022 season where he did have a fantastic year, but I don't know if he's that good offensively. He's probably a lot closer to the guy that we saw the last couple of years, but still like the move for the Blue Jays. Really, for me, the question is, why is Cleveland doing this? This is one of those situations where you look at the Cleveland Guardians and you say, this is what's wrong with Major League Baseball. Yes, I want deferrals on, when a player is getting $800 million, let's not defer 90% of it. But I will never get mad at the big market teams like the Dodgers, Yankees, Mets, Team X, whoever, for spending money and acquiring stars, because look at the Cleveland Guardians. This is a team that's won 90-plus games 2 of the last 3 years. This has been one of the youngest teams in Major League Baseball. This is a team where every single season we're saying very good regular season team, but just not enough start power for the postseason. They go out this offseason and acquire a couple guys. They could legitimize themselves and really put themselves in position to potentially go on a World Series run. When instead, a team like the Guardians is like, let's pay Matt Boyd $15 million a year. And let's trade away a guy who's in his mid-20s, who's been one of our best players on the team the last couple of years. Like, I don't understand why a team like Cleveland pays guys who are mediocre, but then trades some of their better guys. Yes, I think Andres Jimenez is a little overrated, but I just didn't understand trading a guy who is 26 years of age, who was 6th in MVP voting just 2 years ago at age 23. Like, that is the kind of transaction that upsets me as a baseball fan. But good to see at least the Blue Jays say, instead of, trading away, we have so much talent, instead of trading away those pieces and blowing it up, we're going to double down on our roster and try to get back into the postseason next year. So I respect that by the Blue Jays. They also got Yimi Garcia, who was like a little target that ran down for the Dbacks. He's not elite, but definitely for what the Dbacks need in the bullpen would have been helpful. And then the last transaction I thought was kind of interesting. The Colorado Rockies picked up Thairo Estrada, coming off a really down season, but the last 3 years, Estrada has been a very impactful player for the Giants, playing a little defense, got a little speed, got a little pop. Is he the greatest Major League Baseball player? No, but if you could get the guy that we saw in 23, 22, even 2021, like, that's a very, very helpful player for the Colorado Rockies. So did not mind them going after and acquiring Thairo Estrada at all. Now I want to discuss if the max free contract priced out the Dbacks from Zac Gallen a summer from now. And if you're looking to place a little wager, then of course the best place to do that is going to be FanDuel, because get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. My favorite thing to do on FanDuel is the same game parlay. When I see the Phoenix Suns are playing, give me Devin Booker over on points. Give me KD over on points when he's playing, of course, and give me the Suns money line. That 3-leg hits, it brings a big smile to my face. If you want a big smile on your face, just visit FanDuel.com. You'll get started with the $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more at FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, back here on the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, and let's discuss some Dbacks rumors and news from day 2 of the winter meetings. And the first one I want to discuss is Mike Hazen talking about how he's not afraid to add a closer this offseason. As we know, the Dbacks bullpen has been a problem the last few years, and Mike Hazen talked about how we like our current closing options with AJ Puck and J Mart. Hazen acknowledges both of those guys can be the closer for the D-backs next year, but he's also not afraid to add someone with closing experience this offseason, whether that's through trade or via free agency, because it sounds like the closing back-end reliever market is going to be very spicy this offseason. We, of course, know Devin Williams is linked to a ton of teams, but there's also a ton of relievers still out there with back-end closing experience that could really, really help out the D-backs this offseason. If you want to get like expensive and get the top guy, you could go out there and get a little Tanner Scott, who is going to probably command maybe close to $20 million annually. Too expensive for my blood. I don't believe in overpaying for closers. I don't think that's typically good business. But if you were able to get Tanner Scott on like a 2-year deal, maybe where you overpay him a little bit, I think I would be less against something like that. I don't think I would be mad at all if we did something like that. So I could be interested in a Tanner Scott on a short-term overpay. You got guys like Jeff Hoffman still out there. I believe Kirby Yates is still out there. Carlos Estevez, Kenley Jansen, David Robertson. I believe all these guys are still out there. I could be wrong about one of those relievers getting snatched up already. Tommy Conley, like all these guys have back-end closing experience. Chris Martin, AJ Mentor, like all these guys are pretty decent. Jose Leclerc. So like if the D-backs wanted to get, I don't know what that voice I was doing just now. I think it's from one of the guys on Arizona Sports. I think I'm imitating one of their voices, but a lot of closing options still out there for the D-backs, just via free agency, via trade, the Devin Williams, the Ryan Hesleys. There's even guys out there that we probably haven't even discussed on the podcast as a potential closing option as well. But Mike Hazen knows the bullpen is a problem. We saw it struggle at the beginning of the season. We saw it struggle at the end of the year. It's been maybe the biggest problem since I've taken over this podcast in 2020. Hazen knows you can never have enough arms. We saw that last season, especially in the rotation. And then in the bullpen to end the year, just not good enough. So if we could get 1 or 2 more guys with closing experience that could be back-end, high-leverage relievers, preferably guys that could throw hard, rack up the strikeouts, 95 plus on the radar gun, I would be very, very happy if Hazen was able to get at least one of those guys this offseason. Hazen also discussed how Zac Gallen and Merrill Kelly will not be moved this offseason. Both those guys are going to be pending free agents after 2025. And I don't think the odds of Zac Gallen coming back are very high. The odds of Merrill Kelly coming back, I think, are still very good because I still don't think the baseball market somehow is caught up with Merrill Kelly. And he's still going to be old when he becomes a free agent next year. So Merrill Kelly has a fantastic year. I can't see him getting more than like 15 million over like 15 million a year over like a 2 or 3 year deal. Like you probably would get like a Frankie Montes level deal, and the D-backs should not be afraid at all to pay a contract like that for Merrill Kelly. But a guy like Zac Gallen, if we don't sign him this offseason or at the start of the year, we're probably just headed for another Christian Walker scenario where he just plays out 2025, he hits free agency, and then Mike Hazen says, we love Zac Gallen. We would love him back. But the way it's looking right now, it's probably going to be too expensive because if guys like Max Fried are getting $218 million for being a lefty, like Zac Gallen's number is definitely starting at 200 million when he's going to be around the same age, have the same kind of career numbers as a Max Fried, has also pitched on like big stages, big postseason moments, better postseason pitcher in a small sample size as well. Like Zac Gallen, the market, the way it's going right now for pitchers, looking way, way too expensive. And it's kind of surprising because we've seen these guys get big deals the last couple of years. And how many pitchers have really worked out for their opposing teams, have gotten big contracts, right? Erod and Monty with the Dbacks has not worked out so far. Carlos Rodon with the New York Yankees has not worked out so far. Like there has been a lot of recent deals where it's like, oh, you acquired pitcher X and you're paying him an exorbitant amount of money and he's not living up to the deal. That's kind of interesting. Like there's kind of been a lot of those deals, I think, in recent history. Maybe not a lot, but it feels like what, a third, maybe 50%. Like if you sign a pitcher to 20 plus million a year, 17 plus million a year, like the odds of them hitting on that deal is probably 50-50, especially if they're over the age of 30. I think Max Fried has a ton of risk concern when you look at his strikeout numbers, when you look at his postseason career numbers. I don't think Zac Gallen has maybe the same level of concern, but also, if I'm being honest with myself, Zac Gallen hasn't looked the same since he had that scoreless inning streak, right? He looked pretty weird than 2024. And in 2023, he had like half a good season. If Zac Gallen could get back to the level we saw in 22, where he was dominant, one of the best pitchers in baseball, yeah, that guy's elite. But you can also flip it where 3 of the last 4 seasons, he's basically had a 3.5 ERA or higher, and maybe Zac Gallen is not the elite stud that we thought he was in 2022. Maybe he's more of a guy that's like a low 3s instead of a guy that's in the mid 2s. And so very curious to see what kind of 2025 we get from Gallen. If he's healthy, if he's right, I think he will be back to looking closer to the guy we got in 22 than the guy that we saw in like 21 or 2024. So big hopes for a major bounce back for both Zac Gallen and Merrill Kelly in 2025. And then finally, Hazen has talked about how the Dbacks are going to need a different formula to win games going into next year because, of course, we won more games in 24 than we did in 23. And you would say the formula is because of our offense, right? We led the league in runs scored. Jock, Christian Walker, Ketel, like so many guys had fantastic seasons. And going to next year, Hazen is just acknowledging it's not going to be the same. Like he has been very open. We are losing Christian Walker and Jock Peterson. And because of that, D-backs are going to have to figure out a different way to win ball games next year. I think that's fine. I think the D-backs can get a lot closer. And I think the D-backs level production could be closer to what it was in 2023. And you get similar results in terms of a World Series appearance because this D-backs team, I think, still has enough talent in the lineup to compete with just about anybody. Like they're not going to not replace Christian Walker or Jock Peterson at all. Like let's just say we get guys that give you 70% of their production. But let's say Gabriel Moreno gets better. Let's say Corbin Carroll gets back to being the MVP. Let's say Ketel Marte repeats what he does. Eugenio repeats what he does. Jake McCarthy puts up similar numbers, right? Geraldo Perdomo puts up similar numbers. Like there's still enough guys in that lineup where he can still put up a really productive top 5 offense in Major League Baseball. Maybe just less power. Maybe go back to that speed, chaos, small ball they were doing more in 2023. Then maybe you rely more on your pitching in 2025, right? Bounce backs from Monty, Erod, Gallen, Merrill Kelly. You add a reliever or two with the bullpen you already have with a full season of AJ Puck. Maybe your pitching is what carries you in 2025 and you have an offense similar to what you did in 2023 that got you to the World Series. So yes, Mike Hazen is acknowledging D-backs going to need a different formula in 25 to win games, but I don't take that to mean that the D-backs are not going to be as good in 2025 because they need a different formula. We've seen the D-backs with different formula in 23, and that got us the World Series. So get us back to that formula, and I think the D-backs get back to another World Series in 2025. Now I want to discuss rumors leaving day 2 of the winter meetings in segment number 3. And if you're looking to buy tickets, then the best place to do that, of course, is going to be Game Time, because Game Time is the best place for last-minute tickets on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. My favorite thing about Game Time is this little feature called All in Pricing. When you toggle that feature on, you can see the total cost up front with no surprise fees at checkout. You can even get a panoramic view of your seat before you buy so you know exactly what you're purchasing. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account or redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right. Let's get back into the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast and let's discuss rumors. Day 2, leaving the winter meeting. Because as we were just talking, the D-backs should be worried about Zac Gallen and his market because right now it seems like the D-backs are getting priced out of Zac Gallen. If that price tag starts with a 2 next summer, Zac Gallen is not returning to the D-backs. I need you guys to start being mentally prepared because I'll be honest, I don't think I'm mentally prepared for Christian Walker leaving this free agency. I knew it was a possibility, but I really thought the D-backs were going to re-sign Christian Walker. But now that we're here, there's no chance Christian Walker probably comes back to Arizona. If he does, I would be absolutely shocked. And so I think we're on a collision course for the same scenario with Zac Gallen. I love Zac Gallen. He's the milkman. And so everyone just start preparing for the idea of Zac Gallen leaving after 2025. But looking at the winter meetings, it sounds like the starting pitching market has been getting a lot of calls about the availability of some of these really high quality starters around Major League Baseball. And that got me thinking the D-backs really are going to lose Zac Gallen after next season. Maybe we could go out there and acquire someone else's star pitcher that has a little bit more time remaining on their contract because right now there's a bunch of guys who are rumored to potentially be available if the right deal comes about. One guy that could potentially be available is in the NL West right now, little Dylan Cease from the San Diego Padres. Now, if the Padres traded away Dylan Cease, who is going to be arbitration eligible 2025 free agent after this next season. I don't think that would make a lot of sense for the D-backs because it would be the same situation as Zac Gallen. And also, like, if you're the Padres, why are you trading him to your NL West rival, Arizona Diamondbacks? Why wouldn't you just re-sign Dylan Cease yourself? Like, if you're the Padres and you're trading Cease with Musgrove going on Tommy John, like, you're basically punting on 2025, it would feel like if you're the Padres trading away Dylan Cease. So I can't see the D-backs trading for Cease because I don't think his deal is long enough, but I would absolutely love Dylan Cease, this D-backs rotation. How about the Mariners, Luis Castillo? We know the Mariners have probably the deepest rotation in Major League Baseball, legit have like 4, 5, 6 starters in that rotation. Luis Castillo is a stud, and maybe they should think about, because they need more offense, maybe they should move off Luis Castillo, coming off a season where he was very good, very productive, but like not absolutely elite, a 3.64 ERA, like a very good season for Luis Castillo, but I also don't think he's a number one starter. I think Luis Castillo is a frontline starter, but I'll say this, I don't think he's a tier 1 frontline starter. Like, I think he could definitely be someone's number one pitcher, but I think he's closer to like the second half of guys who are number one pitchers for their rotation than like the first half of that list. And so Luis Castillo, if you could add him to the D-backs and he's like your number 2, number 3 guy, probably your number 2 ahead of Merrill Kelly, I think that would be perfect. And he's got 3 years remaining. So I think Castillo would be interesting, especially if Zac Gallen leaves after next season. You would still have a couple years left of a Luis Castillo with a Kelly potentially and a Erod and a Fott. I wouldn't be mad at it at all. How about the Cardinals? They still got 2 years left on Sonny Gray's 3-year contract. And he's a guy who I also think a little bit older, could maybe not be as expensive when acquiring him because he's a little bit older, only 2 years left. I think Sonny Gray is one of those guys that could be either fantastic or just like a really weird season because in 23 finished second in Cy Young voting. This past year, pretty good for the Cardinals. Not elite, but pretty good. But then it's like the Reds in 2021, a 4.1 ERA, right? In 2018 with the Yankees, he was a 4.9 guy. He's a career 3.5 ERA guy, but sometimes when you put him in a situation where he's actually expected to perform and be a good pitcher, that's when it seems like he struggles. Whenever he goes in these low risk, low pressure environments where there's not a ton of expectations on him, that's where it feels like he thrives. And so for Sonny Gray, I do feel like there's a little bit of risk when acquiring him because the D-backs would need him to be a stud. D-backs in position to maybe go on another World Series run or at least try to get back there. They would put a lot of pressure on Sonny Gray, especially with Zac Gallen's a pending free agent. Sonny Gray, you would immediately be one of the frontline starters. If Zac Gallen left, I would just be a little bit nervous putting that much on Sonny Gray's plate, but I still would like the D-backs to acquire him if that was possible. 2 years left at about $50 million. Then the last guy who I think is kind of interesting, who the D-backs could have had a couple years ago, because if you want to hear something crazy, it's something that I always discuss on the podcast. I haven't discussed it a ton recently, but when the D-backs traded Starling Marte during the 2020 deadline, they got back, who was it? Let me look it up real quick, because when they traded Starling Marte, the D-backs, they got back nothing for Starling Marte. D-backs traded him to Marlins, and they got back Humberto Mejia and Caleb Smith, two guys who were absolutely terrible for the D-backs. And the Marlins acquired Starling Marte, who went on to still be an all-star level player for the next few seasons. But the thing that's frustrating is because the very next season, 2021, the Marlins then trade Starling Marte to the Oakland A's. And you know who they get back? Jesus Luzardo. When the D-backs trade him a year prior, they get back Mejia and Caleb Smith, two terrible guys. But the Marlins get back Jesus Luzardo, who is a really good pitcher who just deals with a ton of injuries like everyone else in that Marlins rotation. But when he's right, he's really good. And this past season, very bad numbers, a 5 ERA, only made 12 starts. But if you look at the year previously where he made 32 starts, hit a 3.5 ERA, 180 innings pitched, double-digit strikeouts per 9. I think Luzardo is a really good pitcher who is stuck in a terrible situation and environment. I would love Luzardo in this D-backs rotation with a Gallen potentially leaving, with Kelly getting older. Luzardo is that guy who is 27 years of age that could fit perfectly with the Brendan Pfaadt. If you also believe in Ryan Nelson, like all of a sudden you now have a rotation of guys in their mid-20s, could throw hard with a little bit of upside. I would be very interested in a Jesus Luzardo if the D-backs want to go in that direction. Now, that's it for this edition of the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. Come back tomorrow for more Diamondbacks news coverage and insight, as we'll talk about the winter meetings once again, and we'll dive into the latest news in free agency. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy. Deuces.